Greetings, everyone, and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Beek. I coordinate adult programs here at Trees Atlanta, and I'm here today with Rebecca Gilbert, who is the Director of Education, as well as our speaker, T. We're so excited for today's presentation, Session 3, Forest Regeneration Tools and Techniques, and thank you for being here. So Trees Atlanta has been doing this work for about 40 years. Our mission is to protect and improve Atlanta's urban forests by planting, conserving, and educating. And you can learn more about our work and how you can get involved at the website listed here. We also really want to thank our sponsors at the City of Atlanta. They make so many of these urban forest education programs possible and accessible at no charge, and they help sponsor today. For today in this virtual setting, if you have a question, we invite you to go to the Q&A in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and submit your questions. And during the Q&A session, T will answer those questions live. Also, this class will be recorded and it will be loaded on youtube.com. The entire series, this is part of a 4-part series, is on youtube.com under Trees Atlanta, and please go check it out. There's some great information. After today's session, we'll be sending out a survey, and we do look at your feedback and use it to improve and tweak each new session to better serve you guys. So thank you. These are some of the really fun workshops and events that are coming up in the next month. We have an in the field workshop where you can practice all the things that you've learned virtually with T and Ecologic on March 8th. We also have a great virtual lunch and learn about the spotted lanternfly with UGA Extension, which should be very informative. And we have a really fun event at Story Collider with Atlanta Science Fest and Trees Atlanta and Story Collider, where we're partnering on stories about trees. And I think it will be really fun to come out and hear some wonderful stories that make you laugh, cry, and enjoy trees in Atlanta. You can find out more about these events and so many more ways you can get involved at Trees Atlanta through social media, by signing up for a newsletter, or by going directly to our calendar events at treesatlanta.org. And this whole series is part of our Stay in the Forest certified program. This is Trees Atlanta's newest certification program. And it's really just celebrating the fact that neighbor by neighbor and property by property, we can grow and connect a network of forests, big and small. And there's many different tracks. You can see some of the partners that we're working with, and you can find out more about this by looking at the link on the bottom of this slide. And this is National Invasive Species Awareness Week, and it's so great that all of you all are here today and learning about what you can do in your own backyard. So thank you. And now I'm so excited to introduce our speaker, T. T is the founder of Ecologic. They offer regenerative landscape services throughout the Atlanta metro area. This includes invasive species removal, rain gardens, native plant installations, and so much more. Their mission is to inspire responsible stewardship of native ecologies for healthier lands and communities. And with that, I will turn it over to you, T.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So as Elizabeth said, this is the third in a 4-part series. The 4th part is going to be us in the field. We have.
But yeah, can you make it a little bit larger?
Yes.
Thank you.
There we go.
Perfect.
We've already seen this slide if you were with us in part 2. And this is a little review, just knowing what your field protocols are, is how we're moving forward. But now we're actually talking about the things that you're doing for real with your hands. And hopefully we're seeing more of these types of critters like this turtle right here. So you're not necessarily going to see the turtle itself as part of your observation, but one of the things you can learn how to do is read your landscape, at least in broad terms. So in a space like this, you might see that there are some shapes that indicate land use. Here you have terracing. You know that that's not a natural formation, so this area will have been heavily worked by people. And in this other slide here, or in this other picture, you can see I put a stick on top of what I'm trying to accentuate, but do a better job with the squares. These are old posts, so clearly this was land that was being used for range purposes, to keep cattle or something like that, because they're keeping them sequestered from one another. And before that, it was likely used for agricultural purposes. Why else terrace the whole area? But what that's going to tell you is something about the types of plants that are on your property, because you know that people have already worked it. So once you've decided that you're ready to work it, you're going to need some tools. These are must-have 7 tools with the must-have 8th, which you don't need immediately. You don't need a puller bear or a weed wrench or something like that, which is shown in those pictures, those pulley-looking things. You can get a lot done without those if you just start with pruners and loppers and a soil knife, which I have to hold it close to my face so you can see it. Looks like this. A Nijirigama is a hand hoe. It looks like that. Of course, you know what loppers are, and then pruners. Loppers are the big version of those. In the photos, you'll see that there are 2 types of loppers that are going to be helpful to you. You've got anvil loppers, which hit on an anvil. That's what you want to use for dead wood. And the other type, where they pass each other by, those are bypass loppers. And those are ideal for green wood, so living wood. If you have these 7 things, you can pretty much do just about everything you're going to encounter. Another great tool that's not on here is a pickmatic. So it's just a larger version of a hand pick. Once you've got your tools together, you're going to start the ABCs of how to actually work your site, or the ecologic ABCs. So of course, we've talked extensively about access, but access is really just about making things easy for yourself, avoiding the types of difficulties that are really easy to avoid. So that's just planning for what's happening now and planning for the future. If you're thinking about peeling apart a space like this, right, you can kind of identify different layers, which I've given you some examples of the way we think of our layers. But not just the physical layers, but also the steps of the tasks you're going to have to take. So, even if you're at the ground cover layer, or at the ground cover step of dismantling your space, you've already taken care of the trash and everything else that's preventing you from getting at the ground cover. You still have to remove the sticks that are there. You still have to rake out the leaves that are there before you're actually going in and pulling at those vines, because you have to see everything that you're doing. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. So between those 2 slides, right, you can see what we're prioritizing isn't so much one particular plant, but freeing up that middle area. And we're not going in for all the stems. We just want to be able to make our way in and around the space, especially for this type of management where we are doing wisteria management. We all know how awful that is. It's really about getting to the vines that are up in the canopy before anything else, right? You gotta stop the thing that's degrading your site dead first, the most, before you worry about anything else. And that's the same principle that they apply in the ER, right? You triage what's the most important thing, the thing that's causing the most damage first. A lot of the time it's just getting to it. All right, still in A, but the second part of A is aftercare. We also touched on aftercare. Wood chips, I can't stress enough how great they are. And I don't mean mulch, I mean wood chips, like arborist chips. The whole tree is chipped down with all the leaves, all the branches, the xylem, the phloem. When they rub out the tree, sometimes you'll get some of the roots. That's great. And it's alive. It's a living tree more often than not. So instead of a wood that's been cured, it's decomposing actively. So you can see in that lower photo the type of mycelium that grows densely when you use both your leaf litter. Like I encourage you to steal all the bags of leaf litter from your neighbors. That's the result of us doing soil building by layering leaf litter and soil chips. It works great. But you have other ways that you can easily preserve the soil. And a lot of it just has to do with keeping it in place. So one mistake I often see is people digging out the root systems and they're taking all of the ground with the roots as they go, and then they throw that all away, right? That's living, material that is not just helpful, but absolutely necessary for your plants and your plant communities to thrive and survive ultimately. So if you take away those ingredients and you're not replacing them, then you're not going to have success. And then propagate what you have on site into those voids that you make. This is not us. This is work that I saw off the side of the road, and I was like, oh, I need to take a picture of this because I see this so often. So these folks came in and they're digging out kudzu roots, and you can see just the huge voids that are left behind. Cumulatively, you can imagine what's going to happen over the next rain, right? How those are going to get dug out further. It's nothing's been covered, but not only that, the soil is still loose. And you have all of this unevenness. So one of the things that we're very cautious of is getting as much of the soil off of those root systems as possible. I wish I had a better photo, but it's the one I could find. Really, even just knocking them, gently with your tool or whatever to get all that soil back so you can put it back in place. It makes a really big difference. Now, what do I mean by tamping down as part of aftercare? It's literally doing that with your foot, right? You can do it with your hands too. And then, of course, the bandaging effect of those wood chips and leaf litter, and then other types of aftercare are these constructions that we've talked about, like brush berms. A great place to use brush berms is along banks, areas that get eroded frequently. And you can see that with my smiley and my not so smiley, my sad face. What that is a side-by-side comparison of leaf litter being held up on a slope where the brush berm has been there for 4 years. So the brush berm is quite degraded, and even so, it's still holding all of this leaf litter. We hadn't added to it. And right below it, you can see what a difference that makes to have, just a catchment there. And it also allows time for those plants, those seeds that would normally get washed away, to actually find purchase and start to make roots. And here again, we have work that's not ours next to work that is ours, and it might look very, very subtle, but if you look closely, you can see that how disturbed that earth is on the left-hand side versus having that layer of chips and then leaf litter. But ultimately, it's great either way to get the vines, but this thing about the soil, it is so important, especially when we have lots of us working in these forests on these trees. Moving on to B. So B is for best practices, which is really just about what are the helpful hints that I've discovered doing this work that, you know, I know now that everyone should avoid. This photo is a great example of something you should always avoid. Just don't let your plants go through things like this, your stone masonry, your fences, anything that is supposed to be a permanent fixture in the landscape, you want to keep any sort of growth away from it, unless it's just very, very easy to pull off. And hey, woody plants, they're not easy to pull off. But when they're soft and new, they are very easy to knock back. So if you notice that this picture I have, it's got all these things that I like to call nubbins. Someone's not cut it all the way down to the main stem or the trunk or whatever. So what ends up happening is it harbors more shoots and it's harder and harder and harder to get in there. So it's like this crown of little woody sticks. And it just becomes more and more difficult over time. Well, when those shoots are new, all you have to do is come by and swat them down in the spring. They're so soft. But if you're not noticing and you're not doing that observation, just paying attention or looking for these types of things, right, you're going to miss it. And then it's next year and it's an annoyance. And that's why you notice it. Same as taking care of your health, like anything else. It's not fun, but it is what it is. Tongs are another thing to avoid, and spooling. We'll look at what those are. Here, what I really want you to see is that a common mistake is cutting these stems way too low, these woody stems, because what's going to happen is you're not going to remember where you cut your thing, and then you're going to trip over it. We've talked about it. So try and keep things hip height. Not only that, not only is it a hazard to you, but you don't have any more purchase when you cut things all the way down to the ground. So if you give yourself this height about hip, as my lovely crew member is showing us, about hip height, then you have plenty of purchase and you have all this leverage that you can work the root system out with. Imagine how hard it is to work out an extensive root system like that, that's really in there, and you're like trying to get it out. It's impossible. It's a nightmare. So in a case like that, what we have to do is exhaust the plant, which is best practice anyway. That's one that I didn't put on your list, but if you can, if it's an option, and the root system's like really, really ingrained in there, what you can do is just strip the plant of all the greenery and get it down to main stems, basically like that picture is showing you, and keep it like that for a year. Just keep knocking off all that new soft growth for a year, because what's happening to the root system is it's exhausting its stores of energy and it's dying back. And in a year, it's going to be like, it's going to be so much easier. It's just going to come up. You'll be amazed. So you've done basically no work, and then on top of that you don't have a hole that you have to mitigate erosion for or plant something else into. There are just so many reasons to be patient about this and to think about it in a systematic way. There are my infamous tongs. If you look to on top of that person's boot, someone's taken a branch and they've gone like this, right? And then they've thrown it in the landscape, like those other branches that are thrown there on top of that ivy. So what happens is these branches get all stuck together. And then on top of that, stuff grows on top of them. And then you're like, I have my huge ivy pile. What do I do? 5 years later. And you start to get in there, and guess who likes it in there? The yellow jackets, and the copperheads. You've made the perfect home for them, and you've made it really difficult for yourself to move those things out of that space, not to mention reintegrate them in a way that would be helpful to you, which is, you know, a terrific way to use resources, because who doesn't want to reuse and reduce? And here we have another example of the infamous nubbins. No, not only is this making it hard for you to manage this species, first of all, this is not an invasive species. This is just badly pruned. But even if this was an invasive species and I didn't care about it being pruned properly, that again, that dieback, it just makes it much harder for you to get in there and do whatever type of maintenance or management work you need to do over time. You can also see how each one of those cut pieces has actually died, all the way back. So the plant doesn't like that. If you're trying to encourage something like this elderberry, you don't do that to it, because that invites all kinds of disease. It's very stressful for the plant. The only reason that this elderberry survived this amount of abuse is elderberries are incredibly resilient. But in this other photo, this is something I also see very commonly, is folks will just cut things down and leave them in situ, which is to mean they just leave them where they are. That doesn't help you navigate the space later, right? You want to be able to come through there and check for regrowth and other things. And here I have a photo of the spooling as promised. So why not to do the spooling, right? Because which time? Well, one of the things about debris is we want it to decompose. And so if you have these little tiny, tightly wound nests of vines, those take far, far longer to decompose, to go from green to brown so that they're usable, than vines that have been cut up into nice lengths and kind of loosely piled. Those are going to decompose way faster. So if you're someone who's impatient, as we all are, make this process go faster. You want it to go faster. Other ways that you're going to keep your soil integrity intact is avoid slippage on the ground. So especially in areas that are sloped, make sure you're not working when the ground is saturated, when it's very wet. Have boots that are going to have like a flexible sole, because if you have like hiking shoes, those chonk into the earth. It's almost like having little shovels on your feet when the ground's wet, honestly. So even just wearing tennis shoes makes a big difference. And then you can avoid just trampling the area at large if you have a designated path in and out of your work area. It makes a huge difference for the amount of more fragile species that are going to come in, because you'll walk on them inevitably and not see them, especially at this time of year. So just, keep your destruction to the one path, and then you don't have to worry about it. But one of the biggest obstacles for folks, and homeowners especially, is we get overwhelmed by all of the different things that there are to do. So this is really where photos are going to be helpful to you, and where recognizing that this is, you're not trying to get 100%, you're just doing one thing at a time, and you're coming back for the second thing, right? And then, of course, my little thing about tool care, which is if you have tools that work well, they work well. You don't have to fight. So what I'm trying to show you in these photos is, yeah, the difference is subtle, but the difference is there, right? this is only a difference on one session in these pictures. As you collect these over weeks and months and years, you can have the satisfaction of basically playing well, Where's Waldo, you know, trying to figure out wow, how did it look like that before? We didn't even know that that fire burning pit was in there on that one property until we pulled back some stuff. All right, so we talked about best practices. Now we're on to cues of care, which is really about defining the site. Um, the reason you're doing that is because you're trying to influence behavior and communicate to other people that you're doing something intentionally. This is on purpose. There's so many ways to do that. And my list is by no means exhaustive. You know, like there are other types of constructions like trellises and arbors and pergolas and all kinds of things that you could put in your landscape. But a lot of the time, it's just as simple as creating an edge. The edge does incredible things for a space visually, because what it does is it says, this is one thing and this is another thing. And that helps. So you can see, right, even without the lawn, that really cleans up the space to have those perennial stems reintegrated. They're a great way to use debris as edging, and it's also creating more habitat. And just for a bit of reference, that's what that space looked like before, and that's where my edging currently is. It's that blue house that was in the background. So we understand the importance of doing cues of care, but now you need the things in order to make those cues. And then of course your other types of wonderful regenerative constructions that are going to build habitat. So we're on to debris. Before all of this kind of stuff can be made into riffles and trellises and wattling and all of the other stuff that's going to cycle your nutriment back into a space, it needs to be processed. And that's what we're doing in this photo here. Processing is really about breaking things down, you know, into usable shapes and sizes. Really important to maintain access around your processing site. You know, have an area where you can stage all of your debris, but also like a common mistake is people will put their neatly stacked piles right up next to a fence so they can't get all the way around it, right? And then there's something growing on the other side of the fence, and then all of a sudden your whole stack is covered in autumn clematis or something else, and briars if you're unlucky, and you have to reconcile with that. So access never goes away, even when you're dealing with debris. Stack things in the same orientation. It seems so simple, but it's going to make such a difference for when you have to come back later and pick these things up, right? That's why you have a tarp in your toolkit to do stuff like that. Tarps are great for moving things around. And yeah, they're just great for moving things around in general. And then think about what you're going to use your debris for, because that's going to determine how big you want it, the different sizes and the different types of categories you want to make for yourself. If you want to make like a wooden natural sculpture, which I have a friend who does this, his name is JD Koth. You can look him up. He has a piece at one of the farmers markets. But anyway, you can weave this stuff together into like beautiful sculptures and stuff. But if that's your intention, right, you're making different lengths than someone who wants to build hugelkultur or bury all this stuff to make a rain garden. So this is stuff you should already know about what you're doing with your debris. And here are some of the categories that we use for our debris, how we split it up. Even if you don't use these categories, I will say at the very least, you always want to keep your pokey stuff away from everything else. It is just the most unpleasant experience in the world to like go in and try and grab a big armful of branches and feel very confident about it, and then get like thorned by an aleagnus, all right, or whatever else. So if you didn't know that aleagnus makes thorns, it does. And they're nasty. But one of the things to consider also in making your categories is how these materials are going to decompose. So even though something like wisteria or kudzu um, is a woody vine, technically, it's a softwood that turns basically into sawdust in very little time as it decomposes, versus something like English ivy. It maintains that structure. The vines almost get like this stringy quality to them. If you remember from earlier slide, I said vine blankets. That's what I'm talking about. If you take those matted English ivy vines and you kind of pull them apart, the way that they use jute on slopes, it works almost exactly the same. It's incredible. But something like the wisteria and the kudzu, they just fall apart. So you don't need to have them together, or you can. Herbaceous stuff decomposes in no time. Deadwood, greenwood, these are things to be aware of, but also like the size of the wood is going to affect how they can decompose and how much time that takes. And so what I want to show you here is, look, you have to process debris anyway. So why not do it with intention? And why not make it work for you? If you're spending all of this time getting things cut down to size and then shoving them into bags, that's what you're doing. You're already processing. So you might as well do a little planning and make it work for you, instead of spending this time and then throwing away what is basically raw building material to help you regenerate your yard if you use it well. Oops. And then my very last one is experiment. What this photo is, if you can't tell, those of you who don't have cats, this is pine pellet cat litter. And I was like, this is silly. I'm throwing all of this away. And I have this ground cover invasive, issue at the edge of my goldenrod here. So once I get all of the poop out of it, what if I just put it here? So what I do is I put it down and I put wood chips on top, and it works great. It decomposes and it builds this nice layer of soil. I'm going to start seeding in it. I don't have a picture of what it looks like nice, but that's what it looks like before that. So try things now that you kind of understand like what the framework is, what you're going for, right? What are like the big no-nos and the big yeses? That's all you need to know. Now just try stuff, go make mistakes, because that's how you learn. And thank you. If you want to come make mistakes with us out in the field and learn more about IDing the plants that we'll be seeing out there and how to apply these things, then please join us. We would love to have you. Thanks, guys. Yeah.
Yay, thank you so much, T. I really appreciate that. We have a couple of questions, but I would love people who have additional questions to drop them in the Q&A so we can have a little bit of a conversation with T. So if you have any questions for T, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A. So one of the questions that came up for me is along the stream, you had a picture of one of your berms, which I hope we get to make when we're out in the fields or learn how to make. When you make those berms, are they made out of the invasive materials that you've taken out, or are they, you take the invasive materials and you process them somewhere and you're using already processed materials to make those berms?
That's a great question. So it's going to depend.
Okay.
The worst, the worst answer that no one wants to hear. But in that situation, like if I did have any living woody invasive species that I was going to try to add to that, it would only be to the top.
Okay.
So anything that's touching the soil and that's really like within that first foot or two, if it's big wood,
Hmm.
but anything that's in the first foot should be already dead. So
Okay.
either already processed stuff that you've managed from the site or dead wood that you're collecting from the site, which, we live in a forest situation, so we get a lot of dead wood. There's always opportunities to reincorporate dead wood.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question is how did you get started with this work? Concerned I won't know what I'm doing when I jump into my regeneration project. Um,
We don't have enough time to cover it. How did I get started in this work? You'll find a lot of people like me who are doing this. We come from all kinds of eclectic backgrounds, truly. It's just that's part of the strength of the industry, I would argue, is that because we're new and we're all from different backgrounds, this is getting a lot of different perspectives that are solving problems in a way that's not been done before. But my personal background is, you know, my family is very naturey. I was very naturey. I tried to study landscape architecture and I was like, I don't, that's not enough naturey. If it's too, it's too formally. So that's why I know a lot of the landscape architecture stuff, um, and how to apply it. But the regenerative aspect, I would say, is, as with I think a lot of folks, maybe Elizabeth could probably speak to this too. Just kind of like something you do because you love nature and you find it fulfilling, and you're just trying to find an excuse to be around it. The fact that being around it gives you all this experience that translates to knowledge is just sort of the bonus, right? But I'm just trying to be outside, and I encourage you to think about it that way too. It's like, just have fun outside, look at
that's
stuff.
great. So I would say that he is also saying that you should not be concerned that you're not going to know exactly what you're doing when you're jumping into your regeneration project. You should continue to learn and experiment.
That's exactly what I was saying. Right, experiment.
Another person said, I'm overwhelmed by kudzu vines that are coming into my space from adjacent properties. I can only cut once it's on my property. Do you have any advice for this?
Well, I don't suppose you've already tried to talk to your neighbors and see what their interest is in getting involved. And of course, not everybody's going to be into it, or not everybody's going to be copacetic. So that's a hard one. And honestly, I don't have a solution, frankly, because, if someone doesn't want to manage an issue like that, unfortunately, it's not just their issue. But we don't have any like laws or regulations that I know of in place yet that can compel folks really to do something about it, unless it's like degrading your house, like growing into your house or growing towards your house. So you could
Yeah.
offer to do some work for free and push it away from your fence line, at least. That would help you.
Well,
So,
I know like that's been an issue when we were working at Fern Bank Forest, right? And one of the
mhm.
things that Fernbank has done is they have a relationship, more of a beneficial relationship with their neighbors. So,
Mhm.
T will go with the forest manager and look at a neighbor's property who's adjacent to the Fernbank forest. And if they're doing things to help remove invasive species, they can get a free membership at the museum. So not to say that you can do that with your house and the kudzu issue, but perhaps there's some sort of creative, beneficial relationship that you can, or
Yeah,
carrot that you can do to like get some sort of help.
yeah.
We'll have to think about some ideas together. Um, can you share the cues of care again? You spoke about it in the previous class.
Um, like the ones that I listed, I think I had edging, dead hedges, trellises, signage, seating areas, pathways are a great cues of care, or a great cue of care. Targeted mowing is a great way to do cue of care when you just mow, certain areas and then leave a few clusters of plants together. So you have like a few goldenrod and broom sedge, and then you've got a bunch of low sedge. You're like, oh, I'll leave the higher stuff and kind of do a little walkway through. It's really think of it as like what are the subtle visual cues, right? The signs beyond signage that just tell you that a space is being used. But really, like, don't discount edging. It really it works great. Having a line of sticks or even woven stems really can be a powerful and beautiful signal that this is a planting bed and this is where your feet go.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I think that brings to mind some examples that I see Trees Atlanta do along the Beltline Arboretum, where when you're walking down the Beltline, there'll be a lot of, goldenrod and etc. But we mow right adjacent to the pathway, or Parks mows right adjacent to the cement paved area. And that's like a visual edge. And then we also have a rope kind of fencing. And then we have something outside of that in addition to some signage. But those are some
Yeah, I was gonna say
examples of
there's
things.
signs too, aren't there?
Yeah. And then there's some signs and like, this is what's happening.
Right.
So those are some
Here's what we're
examples of
doing.
what you're saying. Yeah, that you can see. If I were to invest in one tool to start a project, what would your recommendation be?
Oh, the soil knife. She's so versatile. And get the A.M. Leonard one, okay? Don't waste your money on anything else. This gal, I just cut through a a Euonymus fortunei. What's the common name on that? Elizabeth?
I don't know.
One of the evergreen vining invasives that make these big vines with this guy, with this very one. So
Wow.
that serrated edge works great. You can use it almost like a little hatchet. Same with this, although this is quite dull. Uh, you can get terrific leverage on it. The blade goes all the way through. That's a little, thing to cut it. You just can get so much done with the soil knife. You can. But then the Nijirigama is a close second, especially if you're doing ground covery, also vine type stuff, which is this guy again. Oh my goodness.
Seems
And then
like
I'm
you
like,
lose
but
that
you
a
also
lot.
need a rake.
It seems like you use that a lot with the Loriope when I've
We
seen
use
you.
it a lot with the Loriope, but I also like it for the English ivy because here's one of the things with the Nijirigama is it has this reach so you can pick up the vines. And
Mm.
then this nice blade just allows you to cut them right as you go. So it's quite quick. When you're doing ground cover, thick ground cover of English ivy, or even vinca, um, it works wonderfully. But you don't have to have like a whole big rake. This is one of the rakes I use the most often, just a little hand rake.
That's great. So it's all things that you can carry pretty easily
Mm-hmm.
with where
And
you're going.
I recommend having a belt with a holster. Just, you know,
Yeah,
it's like
you don't
10,
lose it
$15 on Amazon, or wait, we don't use Amazon. Uh,
anymore.
someone who's not Amazon.
Yes. Um, what is the best way to deal with
Don't let them
Japanese
form.
chaff flower? Is there a better tool to use or technique with chaff?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, we have a video showing chaff flower removal technique. I got to see if I can repost it because it's posted all the way back uh, in our Instagram posts. But that's a great reminder for me to put those tutorials back out. And that's one where this soil knife, it seems like it would be cumbersome because you have to go in for each root system. But again, it's about how you use that point. Really, like, what you're going for with the chaff flower isn't the whole root system. You just want to get that top part. You're going to see this in the video. I describe it exactly the same way. You want to get that top part where it's resprouting from. So it almost looks like a little crown. And pops right out. You can use the tip of the soil knife to actually like push the soil back in place and pull out the chaff flower, which makes a tremendous difference again for preserving your soil. So you're not digging out a big divot, right? You're not digging out a bunch of root systems. You're almost like teasing out the root systems with this thing.
Got it. That's great. Yeah, if you can find that video and tag us, we'd love to like help share, or you can just go straight to EcoLogic's Instagram. That's super helpful. Also, just a follow-up question, can you remind me of like the best month to be removing chaff, like before it gets all those seeds everywhere?
Well, if you can recognize it now, you can start
Okay.
getting it because you'll see they're perennial. You'll see that kind of like, you know,
Okay, so
clusters of the
yeah.
tops of the chaff at this time of year if you
Okay.
are paying attention. But um, those sticky seeds, they really start coming in late August and September.
Okay.
So
So before that.
you'll notice them flowering late, or I would say like late June, mid to late June, somewhere in there. And then they'll start forming the seed heads, and then when they start going brown, it's too late. You should have already started working on it, but it's not, it's
Okay.
not really ever too late. You just have to modify your approach. So if you have the seeds and like just how sticky they are, the way that we do it is we come in and we just bag all the seed heads first in the area where we're working, so we're not going to get covered in them, and then move them to somewhere else where it's going to be disrupted, or even reseed them back into the same spot. So once that's done, then we come in for the root systems, but we might not even do that because there might be so much seeding chaff flower that we just want to focus on, again, stopping the thing that's degrading the site the most, the fastest, which in a case of having a chaff flower infestation, that's pretty high up there. So just getting the seeds from preventing them from starting the cycle again is like
a really good move to start
yeah,
with.
is as far as you want to go. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm like, keep your targets narrow. You don't need to get out the whole chaff flower. Maybe you just need to get out the seed heads, right? Maybe you need to focus on the root systems of the privet next year or the year after, when the root systems are like almost dead and rotted and super easy. So you're not taking out your whole hillside along with them.
That's awesome. Speaking of inclines, somebody asked with stream banks and other edges of inclines, where exactly do you place the brush burn? before the decline or on top?
It's really just a question of how eroded it is, because just because I have a decline doesn't mean it's eroded or even that there's no vegetation there. So we want to take those things into account as well. I might not necessarily want to fill in a space if I have like a rocky edge and like a very different ecology that I want to preserve and I don't want to cover up. Whereas another area that might seem pretty flat, but sort of monolithic, like all the same, that might actually be a good place for a brush berm. But generally speaking, if you're just trying to interrupt the flow of water, right, and disperse it better, which is why you would take the crest of the hill into account. Generally speaking, you want to put it right at the crest. So not before, but like at it.
Okay, so right at the crest if
Uh-huh.
you're
So
if
you
all
might,
other things.
a
Yeah.
lot of the time you're going to have to stake it,
Okay.
your brush berm, especially the first one. Again, depending on how steep that slope is.
Okay. I hope we get to practice one. Do you have any recommendations of how to get rid of Italian arum? I might be mispronouncing that.
Yeah, we're dealing with that in Fernbank right now. Fun. So this person obviously is too, because it's just popping up at this time of year. um, we use the soil knife. We also use a trowel works well, just like a normal digging
Hand trowel.
trowel. Because you sort of have to come in at a perimeter with the arum. You don't want to break up the roots as much as possible. Again, like you're not trying to remove all of that soil if you can help it. Um, it's like doing if you guys have ever dug up the field garlic, they're sort of dispersed, right? And they'll fall apart, but they have like,
Mm,
they make a tuberous thing. My solution with them, it's not very satisfying, is just, yeah, you're going to come out a little bit further, but then you're going to end up shaking off a lot of soil. And then what we do with all of that stuff is we actually trash them. This is one of the few types of debris where we're going to take it off the site, because same with any seeding or fruiting bodies, by the way. Like the seed heads of any invasive species, you should be trashing. Don't try and reintegrate those. But the root systems of the Italian arum are so robust that
so you take those off.
we trash them,
I
and we have Fernbank dispose of them.
got it. And then can you give examples of like two other fruiting or seeding? Would the chaff seeds would be one that you would remove and
Right.
trash.
So
And
say you
the
have like a big mature privet. There are
yeah.
lots of reasons why you might want to keep that privet. So many reasons. It's might be full of birds' nests. The birds love to nest in the privet. I don't know if you
Hmm,
guys noticed, but so it might be the time of year when you don't want to dehome all of these babies. But that's one that gets covered in berries. And you should be noticing them right about now, actually. You could
awesome.
go ahead and trim those off if you don't want to have to deal with a bunch of baby privets. But if you have like a stream bank that you're trying to stabilize before you take out, your woody invasives, then you're leaving stuff like privet, but then of course you don't want it seeding and fruiting in the area. Nandine is another one, that everybody is reminded of when the berries go red. Uh-huh.
Yes. Awesome.
Mahonia, very easy to knock off those berries and fun too. And when you knock them off, the color inside of that stem is like highlighter green. It's crazy.
Oh my goodness.
And the
I have
root
to check that
systems
out.
of, just as like an aside, if you guys are into herbalism, the root systems of the Mahonia are really, really high in berberine, which is uh, I think what makes turmeric the color that it is. So
Wow.
that's why they're yellow. My herbalist friends are going to correct me, but I'm pretty sure that I got it mostly right.
Um, okay, at what point do still grass seeds become viable?
Oh, still grasses. They're tricky, tricky. So you know how corn, right, develops inside of a sheath?
Mm-hmm,
Corn is in the grass family.
mm-hmm.
And it turns out most grasses have this capability where they're actually making those seeds inside of that green sheath. So even though you might not see the grass seed head on something like the silkgrass, you will find that inside of the stem, kind of like a corn, a head of corn, there will be seeds in there. And from what I can tell, there's two times of year where these seeds come viable. So like there's the first round, the hidden seeds, and it's somewhere in mid to late summer. And then the ones that become visible, which just look a lot more like normal grass seeds, like your long grass seeds, they do the double like that on top. Those come out early fall.
Very helpful. How long do I wait to plant back in native species to an area where invasive species have been removed?
Well, it depends on whether or not you have any soils that are intact from the healthy ecology prior to that area being disrupted. So we talked about some of the ways that you can tell whether or not you have healthy soils. One of those ways is to look for those signs of whether or not uh, the the ground has actually been shaped. That's classic, you know, looking for terracing or looking for unnatural shapes to see if any bulldozing or just like pushing away the top layer of soil has happened on your site. If not, then you might be in good shape. If they're very, very big old trees, then you might have older soils. And then looking for other indicator species, the types of plants that are only going to grow in soils that are older, that take a long time. Spring ephemerals are especially those types of things, like the hexastylus, the little brown jugs is hexastylus. I see it all over the place, but they only grow in older soils because of the way that they propagate, which is with ants. So it takes a long time. Versus something that comes in on the wind, you know, like dog fennel or goldenrod, it could come from anywhere. If you have older soils, you probably don't need to add much, right? If you don't, if you're just seeing pioneering species, which are the types of species that tend to come in after disaster and move in very quickly, then you probably want to diversify. And I would say living in an urban context like this, you probably want to diversify anyway, because even if you have older soils, chances are they've been degraded by, you know, just the types of pressures that we see on a regular basis, like flooding and erosion and pollution and so on and so forth. So always
That,
add more.
yeah,
Always
that
diversify.
diversify. Um, so we are at the end of our time. I want to thank you so much, T, for sharing your wisdom and your expertise with us today. If you would like to practice some of the things that we've learned about in the field, please check out the workshop. And a survey will be going out after today's session. We would love your feedback about today's session. And thank you all so much for being here and doing what you all can, starting in your own backyard. Take care.